Hello, hello. I don't think we need that. I don't know if we need a microphone, do we? Well, quick announcement first. Unfortunately for Matt, his birthday has been moved from June 9th to June 10th. So save your text and emails and birthday wishes for tomorrow. Jane, the place looks incredible. It's amazing. It's such a beautiful tribute to your mom, who's so near and dear to all of us, everybody in this room, and so many more people. So thank you for putting this on and for having us all get together. It's a really special occasion to celebrate Auntie Carolyn and 99 years and 191 days of just life, just full of life. Such an amazing woman. So Nathan's gonna say the prayer. Our go-to guy.
Right.
You definitely don't need that.
I hope I brought my glasses. Hello, Kevin. Let us bow our heads in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the life of Carolyn Jane McAfee. We remember how loving and caring she was in this world and how she touched the lives of everyone in this room, and so many more. Our Father, in your hands we humbly trust our sister Carolyn and bid her eternal rest. Welcome her into paradise where there will be no sorrow but fullness of peace and joy. We ask that you grant her everlasting happiness. May her soul rest in peace forever through the mercy of God. All this we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Well, Jane asked Meryl and I to get the ball rolling, and what she'd love is this is a celebration. This is a happy day for us to, if you're comfortable, come up and share a memory of Aunt Carolyn. I know we have lots of happy and fond memories, but I have lots of snapshot memories of Aunt Carolyn in the early years, but we didn't really become close friends really until about 7 years ago. She called me out of the blue, and she was living, as you all know, at Cypress Village. Yes. We're okay, I think. Oh, it's live. I'm sorry. Okay. So about 7 years ago, she was living at Cypress Village, and it was more of a big condo. It was more assisted living, which wasn't for her. So at the young age of 93, she called me and said, "Let's go buy a house. I want to buy a house." I said, "Well, we can set that up." She said, "No, right now." So I did. I went and picked her up and went up, and she was all ready, and she had her floppy hat and her big sunglasses and her bag with everything in the world in it, and got in my car and started to tool around the neighborhood. And I pulled up in front of his first house on Silkvine, may have been the only one for sale. And I said, "Well, this one's available." And she said, "Well, let's go see it." I said, "All right, when do you want to see it?" "Right now." I said, "Well, you have to have an appointment." "Well, that sign says for sale. Let's go see it." So I thought, oh my God. So I called the agent. Of course, the agent didn't answer. And fortunately, there was a car in the driveway, so I went and knocked on the door, and it was the son of the owner. And he was nice enough to let us in, thank God. And because she wasn't going home without seeing this house. And so we went inside, and she got about halfway through the foyer, and she said, "I'll take it." I mean, where the owner could hear it. So I said, "All right." So we looked at the rest of it. I don't think we went upstairs. And we go back in the car, and she said, "Write a contract." I said, "All right, I'll go to my office and prepare it." She goes, "Write it now." I said, "Well, I don't have a contract." "You don't have a contract? What kind of salesman are you?" So I said, "Well, it's a little bit different. It's, you put it on the computer and you blah, 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 blah." And she said, "Oh, I hate that technology. Just write it up." So I did. And on closing, I think it was on the day before Valentine's. I don't remember the year, but about 7 years ago. And so she plans this big party. There's an invitation in there. And she's got hamburgers and hot dogs and the neighbors and a guy playing the bagpipe. I mean, it's a full-on party. She has arrived, and she started her next adventure. And it was then she needed help going and getting carpets and finding things like that. And I became her shopping companion of sorts for a while. And we developed a really great bond. And she talked to me like a friend in the locker room. So but I have many, many fond memories of those car rides and conversations, a lot of which can't be shared. But I'll never forget her. So, who's up? Marilyn, did you want to?
Well, I may not need this microphone either. We all have wonderful, wonderful memories of Aunt Carolyn. She was one in a million. Oh, I see. All right. She was one in a million. No question about her. And she was always so dazzling. Auntie Carolyn was just full of life, as Michael said. She just was so alive. And Bob and I always loved it when we could go up to New York to see Aunt Carol and Uncle Ralph. because it was always going to be something special. And Jane was there too at various ages. But she always made it so special. We were kind of like the country cousins coming to the big city. Well, we lived very well, thank you. But she was so thoughtful. And she always arranged something special for us. I remember she arranged for us to have tickets to 2 Broadway musicals. South Pacific was the first one I remember. And of course, being kids, I guess we were in our teen years, we were always hungry. So Aunt Carolyn took us before the show to what became my favorite New York City treat, Horn and Hardart. How many of you have been to Horn and Hardart? Oh, okay. Well, it's a wonderful invention. I don't know if it's still there, but they have these little compartments, and they have all the pies here, and the cakes here, and the main dish, and the salads. So you pick what you want, and you put your little coin in, and turn the key, and you get it. Well, I thought that was just wonderful, going to Horn and Hardart's. It was even more exciting than the show. But we did have wonderful tickets to the show. And that wasn't enough. She had to keep us busy, had to keep us doing things. So she arranged, this woman thinks of all these things. She's just amazing. She arranged for us to go bowling. I'd never bowled before in my life, but she made sure we all got some shoes that fit, sort of, and bowling balls, and we all just bowled away and had a whale of a time. But she thought of things like that. She was just wonderful. I have a story to tell on my brother, if he doesn't tell it, so I'll wait and see. Well, Aunt Carolyn, no, you understand this. She had a bright red Buick convertible, Zoom. And Bob would drive that, and she trusted him. He was a midshipman at the time. So he would come up to New York with his midshipman friend, and they would arrange for girls, and I don't mean that way. He always had someone, and he made sure he had someone up in Tarrytown area so he could date her. And she let him drive this wonderful car. She trusted him implicitly. So Bob would go off on his dates down in the city with his friends in that roaring red Buick convertible. And then on one of his visits, he was awakened. By the way, he slept in the 3rd floor. And after a night in New York City, well, he and his friend were kind of hungover. And so Jane would go up to the 3rd floor with her friend and say, "That's my brother Bob, my cousin Bob." And that's, and here they are in their skivvies and really hanging out. And as she said, it was not the most beautiful scene you've seen. But Jane didn't seem to be fazed by it, and neither did Aunt Carolyn. Aunt Carolyn wasn't really fazed by anything. She is the one who told me after I did my undergraduate, and then I got a master's degree, and, I just postponing the real world as long as I could, because I didn't know what in the world I was going to do. That's probably the most difficult time in your life. You finish all your education, and then what? So I went to Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Ralph's, because she always had something for me to do, and she was always such fun to talk with. So we were sitting there in her kitchen, I remember, and she kind of leaned over to me and she said, "You need to get a J-O-B." I said, "Oh." I said, "Well, okay." Anyway, I knew that the only thing I really could do in those days was teach school, and I really didn't want to teach school, which is why I was dragging my feet. But I didn't want to go in the military or anything like that. That wasn't for me. It wasn't for girls. It wasn't for women in those days. So I got on the phone and I made a couple of calls, and I set up interviews for a teaching job. And so I was just, shooting distance from Uncle Ralph and Aunt Carolyn for those many years, and I would often go down there and enjoy their company, and it was always a pleasure and a treat. I remember one time, I don't know how, but I had a tapeworm. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever had a tapeworm, but it's not the most pleasant experience in the world. And I went to the doctor, and I told him what was happening. And he said, he didn't believe me. He said, well, I'll get you a sample. And so I brought it, and he said, oh my God, I haven't seen one of those since World War II. And it was a tapeworm. I had gotten it because I love to eat raw hamburger. Anyway, I don't eat raw hamburger anymore. But Aunt Carolyn let me come down and do my purging at their house in North Tarrytown, which wasn't the most pleasant experience, either for them or for me. But so bye-bye tapeworm. And so whenever I needed help, it was always Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Ralph. They were just so thoughtful and so, to me, kind of magical. And I remember so often when I was in the Foreign Service speaking with other people about my family, because that's who you are. So it's important to talk about your family. They get a better idea of who you are. So one of the things I always loved to talk about was my family, my brother and sister-in-law, and then my uncles. Do you know I have two uncles who were senior partners in major New York City law firms. Well, I thought that was just so neat. And it really was, because my dad was a captain in the Navy by that time. And these were three Texas boys, born of a very poor family, Methodist, but a good family. My grandmother, Aunt Carolyn, always sung her praises. She wasn't so big on the praises for my granddaddy McAfee. She said he was kind of a fire and brimstone type person. But my grandmother, we all loved, and I know Jane did too, very much. She was a sweetheart and a lovely lady. So I always spoke of them with great pride. And you so, well, I have this wonderfully accomplished family, and this is the American dream. They started from nothing, and look what they did, and look what they can do. Look what anyone in our country can do. So it's always a source of great pride for me to talk about them, and people were impressed, absolutely, because anyone who knew the law firms they were with, they were two biggest law firms in New York City, two most important. And Uncle Ralph was a trial lawyer. Now that's special. You've got to have, that's the one that gets up there like Clarence Darrow. And he's the one that moves the case, has the surprises or whatever, and wins the case. Uncle Ralph but he didn't want anybody in his courtroom. That's what Aunt Carolyn said. But she snuck in once, she told me. I don't know if he knew she snuck in, but she said I sneaked in and I saw him try a case. But Uncle Ralph was also really smart about this lawyer business. He came down to Florida to try a case, and it was Sun Shipping versus Bethlehem Steel. And he was the lead lawyer. Now, you got to be good to do that. But Uncle Ralph was really smart. He said, look, he was telling us, he spoke about it with us. I knew a big city New York lawyer couldn't win a case in the Florida courtroom. So he said, I decided I needed a Florida lawyer. So he he got himself an old boy Florida lawyer, and he was behind the case, but this is the guy who tried the case. I can't remember his name now, but Claude Pepper, of course, a legend in Florida. Founded the Gray Hair of America or something like that, post-Senate and so forth. But he was a good old boy, and that's who my uncle said needed to try this case. Huge case, and it was won, of course. Uncle Ralph usually did win. But I was always so proud of him, and I thought that story was, just so telling about his knowing just what to do, and it wasn't always pointing to himself. It was doing the smartest thing. What could be a winner? And he had it right about Claude Pepper in Florida. I don't think a New York City lawyer would have fared as well as old Claude Pepper. But he won that case and many, many others. We were always so proud to be a member of the McAfee family. We have pride as a family. And Aunt Carolyn was a McDonald. And she made it very clear, very often, she was a McDonald, not a McAfee. And I said, well, we love the McDonalds too. Well, obviously, Aunt Carolyn spoke for the fighting blood and the talent of the McDonalds. But Jane inherits both sides, McAfee, McDonald, and lucky her. So pass it all on, pass it all on. I loved Aunt Carolyn very, very dearly. She was just the breath of life. And she never stopped doing nice things for you. Anything she could think of. I remember I had turned back to my art when I retired from the Foreign Service, and I spoke on some occasion about a drawing board that I thought would be so nice, a drawing table. And she said, go buy it. So I have this huge professional size drawing table, drafting table in my bedroom. There's no other place for it. But that's the way she was. And when I had recently moved in, and I think it was up here, but I mentioned that my AC had quit. She said, go get a new AC. She was like that. She was just like that. And I remember in recent years, she always gave us birthday cards, celebration cards, and there was always some money in it. And I was always so touched by her that I would put it all in a special drawer and I wouldn't spend it. I'd just keep it with the card. And that drawer was very important to me. It was just a part of remembering who Aunt Carolyn was and how dear and generous she was and how much I miss her. So God bless you. Thank you, Aunt Carolyn, for everything. We were so blessed to have you with us in this life.
There's no order here, so anybody that wants to stand up and say something. Well, I suppose I'm nominated. Joe.
Marilyn did steal a little bit of my thunder. But Aunt Carolyn was, as she said, a very special person. I can remember my fondest memories, really, of her and Uncle Ralph are the ones I spent in New York, in Irvington, Tarrytown. And she, like Marilyn said, she just give you anything that she thought was good for you, not just anything. And I can remember playing golf at the country club often. And I can remember when you kids were up there and Matthew had a hole in his pocket. But that was just typical. I have fond memories of the young lady she fixed me up with. She had very good taste. Louise Kreutner was the first one, and we had a great time going to New York City and really have fun. And I was, I was always sober. I didn't abuse that. And then Judy Whalen, who was a wonderful young lady, gorgeous young lady. Her face actually, she was on the cover of Glamour magazine. So that'll give you a bit of an idea. And was a very, very nice young lady. And I kind of seriously thought about her till I met Annie. And then that ended all of that. So that was a lot of fun. And often, Aunt Carolyn, one of my favorite stories, probably my most favorite story, is she would doll up and go downtown with Uncle Ralph. And getting ready to leave, and I would be with her, and she would say, "You may kiss my finger." So I did. So anyway. Yeah. Anyway, it was great. Wonderful memories from my youth, and I'll always remember, and I know she's up there smiling down on us right now.
All right, I came to the party late. That was about 26, 27 years ago. And one thing I remember about Aunt Carolyn, and she had some amazing stories, impressive stories, but just amazing stories. And usually the nights were around Bob and Annie's, dining room table, and there were a few glasses of wine that had been, consumed, and many of us in the room were in there. And I've never met somebody who could start such an amazing story and be unable to finish it because the laughter starts breaking out. And a lot of it was her laughter, which turned into our laughter. And so many times I would turn to Kat and be like, how is the story ending? Because there's so much laughter going on. But her stories were absolutely amazing. I didn't know her near as well as, all y'all in this room, but the stories were fantastic, and the things that she accomplished just seemed to be amazing. And that's one thing I'll always miss. So the stories around the dining room table where there was things that she had done, accomplished, whether married or single, just a very, very, special lady. So, Jane, I'll miss those moments.
I have to add one story.
Did that prompt one?
Oh, well, it's just one that is so Aunt Carolyn. When she first met the guy that I was dating, not Jerry, she looked at him and he had on plaid shorts and baby blue socks. And we walked up. I mean, I thought it was pretty awful, but I didn't think that I should tell him because I'd already mentioned a couple of other things. And we walked up to her and she said, "What in the world are you wearing?" She never pulled her punches.
That's a good.
But he he said of Jerry, I wish I were younger.
Well, I mean, what can you say about Aunt Carolyn, the matriarch, that hadn't really already been said by everybody? I mean, amazingly full of life. A credible storyteller. I mean, and a little bit bawdy, too. I mean, she could make Mike and I blush. That's saying something. But she really knew how to control a room. And I'm really, if anything, jealous of some of the people present here, Jane, Mom, Dad, Marilyn, who got to know her in her prime, because that must have been just spectacular and glorious. I can imagine, seeing her either at her days in the Pentagon or young with Uncle Ralph or back when she was in Hollywood and living solo for a little while. I mean, that must have been just spectacular to see. We are all very fortunate that we got to know her for, a pretty brief period of time at the end of her life, but she still was so full of energy, and the stories that she was able to tell and the way she was able to engage people really kind of helped bind our clan together. She was very much into family and tradition and stories, and she could really regale you with them. She had outrageous sense of humor. She was larger than life, and she will be greatly missed. And contrary to what Mike says, I'm not moving my birthday to tomorrow. One of the really neat things that Aunt Carolyn and I had is that we shared a birthday, and she always called me her soulmate, and that was kind of our special, neat bond that we had together. And she will eternally be my soulmate, and she will be loved and missed. Love you much, Annie C.
That's better than Halloween or Halloween. Well, true.
And you only have to move it this one time. This is her 100th birthday. Next year, you're back to being 90.
That's right. I'll be real brief. And Aunt Marilyn talked about how Aunt Carolyn always made if you came to visit, and so special. And I had gone abroad in college, and I made some friends from San Francisco. So I went over and stayed with Aunt Carolyn, and we got to go to the dump in the pickup truck. So that was really special. But she loved to go to the dump. But she was always very welcoming and wonderful, and everybody has said it. She'll be missed. So.
Someone should talk about the Pentagon and meeting Uncle Ralph and her job.
Well, I wasn't there.
I wasn't either. Come on, Jane, talk about.
Some of you may have seen when I was in the hospital with her. I had about 30 or 40 antique containers of. And the gentleman said, everybody's going to be here hiding behind the ivy or whatever it is. And I said, I'll tell everybody to stand up. So now I have to follow my own advice. Anyway. So, the Pentagon. But first, I didn't want to forget this, so I was holding this. She had, it was a beautiful little angel. You may have seen it in the bathroom. An angel shelf, and on it were these little samples of perfume. They were Lalique, they were just exquisite. And Givenchy, and on, these little tiny things. And then, but at the end, she said, there's something, it's called Blue Waltz. And I remember when I was a girl, it was 15 cents for a little bottle of it. And so I looked it up online, and I went into her, and I said, Mom, hate to tell you this, but it's $5.50 now. And she had it, it was her favorites. And actually, if you smell it, if you don't know what it is, and it's only $5 or $6, you would really swear it's very pretty. So I thought that I would share this with all of you, and so it's by the cake on a little tray. But then I thought, well, fair's fair. Dad liked Old Spice, and so I decided to get some of that for you guys. And I went in, there used to be just one kind of aftershave, there's this whole wall of every kind of, so I got what I thought's the right one. and it's a cream, so you guys could go and have a little bit of Uncle Ralph too. Enjoy that. And then here's this free, and then also the rose water. So anyway, but the Pentagon, my understanding is that Mom started out, she sold donuts at the donut counter, cookies at the cookie counter at Woolworth or Newberry's, and she was the top salesperson of cookies, and she went to business college. Her parents could not afford college, so she went to business college, which really prepared her for things because she took shorthand and so on and so on. And then World War II rolled around, and she went to work at the Ordinance Plant, which of course would never been any possibility. And Rosie Riveter and all of them, all those ladies, would never have gotten into any of the men's jobs until they all went to war. And so she was there, and the executive secretary thought that she was a real lady. She was a young lady who'd been raised to think well of herself. And so she asked her to substitute for her when she was taking care of her elderly sick mother. So Mom moved into the executive secretary's position of the director of the Ordnance Plant in Decatur, Illinois. And then the woman had to retire, and she took this job over. And one thing that disgusted her, and those are her words, she was fed up and disgusted by the number of men who used their exempt status as workers in an ordnance plant not to serve their country. Well, she would show them. She went down to downtown Decatur, Illinois, which was quite a bustling little town in those days, and she wanted it to become a wave because she was very fashionable and she liked their uniform. So she went down one lunchtime, but thank God they were closed for lunch. So she went a few doors down to the Army, and they took one look at her with her credentials, and they grabbed her up, and so she became she joined this man's army. And she tested so high. Everybody was tested with an IQ test. And she tested so high, I think it was near genius, that she was in basic training, and a colonel came around from Washington, D.C., and he was meeting the smart ones, the ones who tested high on their IQ test, and she was one of 5 or 6 gals. And he made a presentation of the factors and conditions of Pearl Harbor and how it started. And she was the only one who stood up and said, well, if this and this and this happened, and that and that and that happened, why did we have to have Pearl Harbor, which at the time was a totally scandalous, shocking, etc. idea, because it wasn't until really recently that a lot of this stuff has come out. And so he thought, she's not only smart, but she's intuitive. So she was invited, and she didn't want to go to the Pentagon. She did not want to go to military intelligence. She wanted to go to Europe. And so they had a little bit of gentle arm twisting. She ended up at the Pentagon. And she was assigned to the O ring, which is the outside ring, and she said it was across from where 9/11 happened. That's where her office was, and she was in a little alcove. And the gentleman there, Al McCormick, was a partner at Cravath, and he had taken a leave of absence to come to Washington, D.C. to run the congressional investigation into the factors and conditions of Pearl Harbor. And then he had stayed on to form military intelligence. The Pentagon was just finished. It had just been built. It was brand new. So he formed the military intelligence, the Corps, whatever it became, and it segued, of course, into the CIA and all this, but he started it, this gentleman from Cravath. And so one day, she had these panels and pieces of, I still couldn't understand what it was, but there were the information. Each card had one of the people at the Pentagon, and it was their dossier, basically. And she came back from the ladies' room or to see a girl in the next alcove, and there was a lieutenant sitting there going through all this stuff. And she said to him, "Would you please stop doing that, sir? You don't have clearance." And she said that he looked at her down his long nose and basically dissed her. He said, "Yeah, who are you?" And so she marched into Colonel Forrest's office, who was the gentleman who had come around to present Pearl Harbor, and she went into him and she said, "I quit." And he looked at her, "Pardon me?" And she explained, and so he went out, and that man was never inside the Pentagon again. And he went and told Al McCormick, who got a hoot out of that, and he said, I want to meet this young lady who seems to think that she can quit from the Army. So my mom went in and, saluted and all this, and he looked at his personal assistant, Eleanor, who was a civilian. She was not Army, and she was like senior to everybody in the Pentagon. She had been around in the Army for years and years and years as a civilian. And he said, would you like some help? And so the next thing you know, Mom said, they pulled in a desk and everything, and she was seated in Al McCormick's office, which would be enormous. It was like 3 or 4 times larger than anything is today. There was a line of chairs, the windows, and one aside is his wife would come when he wouldn't answer the phone, and she'd pull her car right up to the bottom of under his windows and throw pebbles at his windows. This is the Pentagon. So anyway, it was just. So, but she was there, and these scientists, sociologists, people from around the world, information about chemicals, anything they could get. And of course, one of the main questions was the nuclear power issue, hard water, and all this. All these people were lined up, and then they'd go meet with him. And she also took notes, which later became part of the recommendation to the President of the United States that the Emperor of Japan, Hirohito, be deified because he was a god. You don't understand. He was a god. And as a result, World War II ended his being a god. He became immortal, really, and the people of Japan had never heard his voice until he announced the surrender of Japan over the radio to his people. Very few people had ever heard his voice. And so Mom was in the middle of all this, taking notes and dictation. See, the 2 businesses at Brown's Business College did a lot of good. And one day, he said, well, my dad had become an associate with Cravath just before, in 1939 or 1940, before Pearl Harbor. He was drafted, which, of course, elicited a few stories about how he reacted to the news. And, so he was in this China Burma India Theater, CBI. And Al McCormick said, get McAfee back here. Isn't that nice? He just said, get somebody back. And so Dad came walking in, and Mom said this very good-looking man, good-looking guy, walked in, firm, trim, mustache, brown as a bean, from India. And after he had left, Al McCormick asked my mother, he said, Sarge, what did you think of McAfee? And she said, well, I guess a lot of girls would find him attractive. And that's how that started. And here I am. So they had a wonderful romance in Washington, needless to say, and successful. And he proposed to her on the steps of the Pentagon on a bended knee a few months later because he could not resist her. And that's how she ended up at the Pentagon. And she was discovered by another gentleman who was kind of a noble. During World War I, all of the boundaries of Europe were shifted because of the Germans. And he was part of the nobility of the Europeans. And he spoke 1 million languages, and he was basically a spy. So he came over, and he spotted my mother right away, her bone structure and all this. And so he discovered her, and he offered her a contract at RKO. And Dad and Al McCormick looked it over and said, okay, you can get out of it any time. And Dad said, well, why don't you go? Because you always wonder what it was like if you didn't go. Well, the minute she got on the train, he wanted her back again. And he was always calling her at this special dormitory for young ladies in Hollywood. And after 3 months of, as I said, walking the streets of RKO with such as Ronald Reagan and Cary Grant and all of them, she decided to come back and become a very glamorous, very beautiful and charming and generous Cravath bride for the rest of her life. Okay, am I going to point out people? Who would like to come up? Who would like to come up next? Surely some of you have some.
You're a hard act to follow.
No. But because everybody wants to see it, you know. Those people who can't be here today, would like to join us.
Well, this is just a tidbit of Aunt Carolyn's time in Hollywood. She was a starlet, but whenever Uncle Ralph called, as Jane said, she was staying in a special place, home, what do you call them, where young girls, nice young girls could stay. She always made sure that Uncle Ralph was told she was out for the evening.
You mean leprechaun?
Leprechaun, oh yes. That's right, leprechaun.
I don't have the depth that all of you have, but seldom in my life have I met someone that far outshadowed what everybody talked about them. Because I kept hearing about Aunt Carolyn this, Aunt Carolyn that. Oh my goodness, Aunt Carolyn is coming. And you know, she was better than all of that. It's just unbelievable, but there are some people like that. And she and I got along very well. I don't know how she said something about she was younger behind Marilyn's back. And I said something about, you know, I wish I were younger too. And then she said something about, if you were younger, I'd put you in chains. And I said, when? So she, every time I would come to her house, she would say, are you ready? The whips and chains are upstairs. So, you know, my acquaintance with her was short but good. And she always called me a leprechaun. And it's nice to be part of a family when they have given you a nickname because they care. So anyway, yes, a great, great lady.
Well, I guess I can add one anecdote here. You have through my mind that one of the wildest rides I've ever had in my life was in that red Buick as we were transporting Aunt Carolyn to the hospital for a delivery of Mike. And Uncle Ralph, you talk about a mad, mad driver. I mean, he would be in the left lane shaking his fist at everybody. Aunt Carolyn was like this. And she actually delivered before she got to the room. So it was that close, and it was an exciting ride. I was in the back and watching all this, and wasn't anything I could do about it. But I'll never forget that ride. It was really something.
Especially when her water broke.
Yeah.
All over your feet.
Oh, yeah. Not really, not really.
Jane, you have lots of wonderful stories.
I think before we get together, whenever Arlington, by the way, Arlington is I don't know. When I arranged for Dad to be interred in the columbarium, which I just read about in Ann Landers, they were obviously anxious to have people there, so it was arranged right away on his birthday, October 20th at 1400 hours, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because that was the year he was born. So, but this time I called him up right on the 19th or 20th of December, and they said, well, you'll have to, I said, well, when is it going to be? And the lady laughed, she said, how soon do you think it can be? So she gave me a number like you pick up in a deli, but I'm still in line at the deli. I haven't made it to the counter of the deli. And she said, then you will be assigned to somebody, a caseworker, and they will contact you. So I guess that's when I get to the counter of the deli, I'll have the caseworker, and then we'll discuss a date. And at this point in time, I've decided it's not going to be in the winter. Thank you very much. If at all, I will next year sometime, because I just don't want to put the family through that, traveling in the bad weather. And so it's going to be in the chapel, and so it'll be very nice, I think. Very nice. But I'm drawing a blank right now. I don't know what to say. There are millions of things to say, actually. But I think now we can go to, I came here, we came here, when she first moved to Florida, she knew she wanted to be cremated. And I looked it up in the Yellow Pages, what else do people do who don't really work on the phone that much? And we found the Ponte Vedra Valley, and we came over here. It's because they're the only place that has a crematory. And it's just charming, as you can see. And the people here are very quirky, right up our alley. They're definitely, they're not, think like this. They think outside of the box all the time. And she gave them all the military information that they needed and so forth. So when she passed away, I called them up and everything just went right along. They gave me the information for Arlington. And then I decided, it just was a process. I think I was mentioning it to Ann the other day. It was just like, if I was setting up a party at Ponte Vedra for all of you, it would be like rolling off the log. I'd know everything. But this time, I've been thinking of all these different things as time has gone on. And so I decided I would get a memorial bench, like you see many of them out there. And it occurred to me that we don't have, Michael has never had a funeral. Mark did. And we have our older brother, Malcolm, who nobody talks about. And so I decided this would be a lovely place to have our family plot, so to speak. And so that's what I've set up. And now, of course, the benches, because of COVID, cannot be put together because they're so backlogged for the marble, the granite. And so I kid you not, I was at my place, and there's a closet where the garbage chute is, and I went in there, and here's this box, which is exactly the size, nearly, of one of these benches. So I looked at that, and I think, Mom and I we would always think of these naughty, mischievous things all the time. And I got that, we got it all together, I got white paper, and I put the white paper on it. And so now it is out there in the place where the bench will be, okay? And then Marilyn's Angel was moved over here, and it was in the corporation yard, and Brent, one of the owners, he and Jackie, some of you met them before we began here today, and he actually got it over there to the spot this morning. We had miscommunicated it, so I didn't think it was going to be done until the actual bench was there. So Marilyn's Angel is there at the place where we're going to have my family, and you'll see the white box. And we have, and I have a folding chair for each one of you. So everybody can go out there and get their own folding chair. It has your name on it. And I have Pentel, so you can write your name on it. And if there are any left over, I'll know who they are, and I'll deliver them to your house, because they all have the names on them. So we can process here after we've enjoyed some cake here, and go out to the garden near the Circle of Heroes. This place is unbelievable. They have the Circle of Heroes, and they have the plaques, on the ground. Mom and Dad have theirs. I learned that you can only have one. So Uncle Stuart and Aunt Mary's are up at Arlington. You cannot have a plaque here unless it's just a personal family sort of thing. And so you'll see them there with the cannon and the flag and so forth, and you'll see where ours is. Our white box, and Marilyn's Angel. And then there's a little green gazebo, and with the chairs and some more water. Mom's favorite, Zephyr Hill. And we'll do that afterwards. We'll proceed up there. It's only about a block away. And then eventually, when the whole thing comes together, then we can meet more informally there, just to kind of say hello and see everything, and the bench. But the bench actually depicts their story. It will have an emblem of a Model A Ford, and then the name McDonell, and then in the middle, the patch from military intelligence, and then the name McAfee, and then the Statue of Liberty. So if there's nothing to be said now, why don't we all have some cake and water and the beverages that's provided. Oh, and I wanted to say, wait a minute, stop. I wanted to say something. We have a new member of the family, little Isaac. He's at number 10 of the pack of McAfees. And I got him a little box for Christmas, the same as I did for the other 9. I didn't really make him a baby blanket or give him a teddy bear. But I did find him a Christmas ornament and a box per se. My one that's more, but it's in there. And also I have Nana's bedspread that she made, and Mikey Vera and Susie are giving it a home, and I have a box there, and I'll show it to all of you. So, and then they can take it home with them, give it a new home. Yeah.
Your mom was a very special lady. I knew her for, 3 or 4 years, so I'm definitely coming late to the party. But Mike, we went over to her house. Real quick, sorry. No, is this live?
It is.
Hi, Kat.
It's on Fox. It's on Fox.
Is it? Oh, good. It's streaming. But I definitely came late to the party, obviously. So I knew Aunt Carolyn for about 3 years, and she called Mike one day, and she needed help paying her bills. And so this was the first time I was meeting her, so Mike's like prepping me as I'm going there. He's like, okay, I'm telling you, she's a little shocking. And I'm like, okay, well, I come from shocking. I'm in human resources. Nothing can shock me. And so I walked in, and right off the bat, I think she sized me up very quickly, and she knew that it would take a lot to shock me. And so I think she amped it up a notch. So every time I went over there, the stories got more insane and outlandish and awesome and just exciting and wonderful and colorful. And she gave me a nickname. You talked about nicknames, and it was what Ralph called her. And it's not something that I can share here, but she always referred to me as that with Mike. So it was, yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, that was the only thing I'm like, whoa, okay, I'll take that. But anyway, she was a very, very special lady. And honestly, one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. And if you can say that after knowing someone for only 3 years, that's pretty impactful. So you're very lucky to have her your whole life. Sorry.
Okay, on the cake.
I'll never forget your speech, man. Just epic. Just epic. Wait, what? Who did that? Mac. You did it. I didn't do that. Yes. No.
I never meet my real grandfather.